On a freezing winter night, a poor, homeless black man wandered down the lonely street, his body trembling from the biting cold. Through the thick fog, he noticed a luxury car stopped on the roadside. Inside sat an old millionaire man and his sick wife, who was being rushed to the hospital. Most people would have walked past without a second thought, but the homeless man couldn't ignore them. Despite his frozen hands and worn-out clothes, he stepped forward to help. Working in the icy wind, he managed to fix the car and get them back on the road. What he didn't know was that this small act of kindness would soon change his life forever. It was a night the world seemed to have forgotten. The kind of night where the cold doesn't just sting your skin, it seeps into your bones, into your soul, whispering that you are utterly alone. The snow fell endlessly, thick flakes dancing in the dim glow of the streetlights, while the wind howled through empty alleys like a wounded animal. Down one such street, in the forgotten part of the city, David walked with his shoulders hunched against the storm. He was young, barely in his 20s, but life had already carved deep lines of hardship on his face. His coat was torn, his shoes soaked, and his hands bare and red from the cold. David was homeless. He had once had dreams of college, of music, of building something that mattered, but fate had other plans. A factory accident had taken his father, sickness had taken his mother, and poverty had taken everything else. What it hadn't taken, though, was his heart. Somehow, through all the cold nights and empty stomachs, David had kept a small spark of kindness alive inside him. That night, after hours of searching for work and finding nothing, he walked slowly toward the small alley where he usually slept. The world was silent, except for the wind. And then, through the thick curtain of fog, he saw something. Two faint headlights glowed dimly through the snow, not moving. As he got closer, he realized a luxury car was pulled to the side of the road, its engine off, a thin trail of steam curling from under the hood. At first, he hesitated. Cars like that didn't belong in this neighborhood. Whoever owned it was far from home and far from people like him. Still, something about the sight of that stalled car in the middle of nowhere made his heart tighten. He stepped closer. Through the frosted glass, he could barely make out an old man in the driver's seat, his face pale and worried. Beside him, a woman lay covered in a thick blanket, her eyes closed, her head resting weakly against the window. David realized immediately what was happening. She was sick. The man's trembling hands tried to start the car again, but the engine only groaned and died. The old man's expression turned desperate. For a moment, David thought of walking away. He was freezing, hungry, and tired, but as he watched the old man glance at the woman beside him, a look of pure fear and love, something inside David refused to move on. He approached slowly, raising his hands so he wouldn't seem threatening. "Sir," he called out, his voice gentle but shaky from the cold. "Your car seems stuck. Need some help?" Inside the car, George Whitmore, one of the wealthiest businessmen in the state, stiffened. He was in his late 70s, his once strong frame now frail, his silver hair covered with snow. The moment he saw David, a rough-looking young black man in torn clothes, his instinct was fear. Without thinking, he locked the doors with a loud click. David stopped. He understood that sound all too well. The world didn't trust people like him. Not the world of the rich, anyway. He had heard doors lock, seen windows roll up, watched eyes look away his entire life. But this time, he didn't walk away. "Sir," he said again, his voice trembling not from anger, but compassion. "Your wife looks sick. Please, I can help. I know cars. Just open the hood." Through the glass, George hesitated. The storm howled around them. His wife Margaret let out a faint groan. Her breathing was shallow. Panic shot through his chest. He looked at David again. There was something in those eyes, honest, steady, almost too kind for the world he came from. After a long moment, George lowered the window just an inch. "My engine died," he said softly. "We're on our way to St. Mary's Hospital. My wife, she's not well. The car just stopped." David glanced at the snow-covered road, no other cars in sight. He knew the hospital was at least 20 miles away. "Sir, it's freezing out here. You can't wait for a tow truck in this weather. Let me see what I can do." George hesitated, then nodded slightly. David hurried to the front of the car, lifted the hood, and was met with a burst of steam. He waited for it to clear, then leaned in, his numb fingers working carefully over the cold metal.
After a few minutes, he called out, "Sir, your radiator hose is cracked. That's why the car overheated." George's heart sank. "Can it be fixed?" David thought for a moment, then smiled faintly. Not perfectly, but enough to get you to the hospital. From his small worn backpack, he pulled out the only tool he owned, a roll of electrical tape. With bare, trembling hands, he began wrapping the hose tight, layer after layer, sealing the split. The cold bit through his skin, turning his fingertips purple, but he didn't stop. Inside the car, George watched in silence. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. A young man who had nothing, working selflessly in the freezing night to help complete strangers. When David finally closed the hood, he said, "Try it now, sir." George turned the key. The engine sputtered, then roared to life. The sound was like hope itself. "It's working," George gasped. His wife stirred slightly, her eyes opening halfway. David smiled, relief washing over him. "Drive slow. That patch won't hold forever, but it'll get you there." George turned to him, eyes wet. "Son, I don't know how to thank you. Please, let me pay you something." David shook his head. "You don't owe me anything. Just get her to safety." Before George could insist, David stepped back into the snow, disappearing slowly into the fog. As George drove away, his wife whispered weakly, "Who was that young man?" George looked out through the rearview mirror, watching David's fading silhouette. He said softly, "Someone the world forgot, but God didn't." Hours later, at St. Mary's Hospital, Margaret was resting safely in a warm room. The doctors said she had pneumonia, but she would recover. George sat by her side, his mind replaying that night. The young man's voice, his frozen hands, his quiet strength. The next morning, when Margaret opened her eyes, she smiled faintly. "You keep looking at that door. Who were you expecting?" George chuckled weakly. "A miracle, maybe? A boy named David?" He meant it. He couldn't stop thinking about him. The way David had refused money, the way he had walked into the storm with nothing but kindness. 2 days later, George's car was towed to a mechanic shop downtown. The mechanic told him whoever patched this radiator hose knew what he was doing. That fix held better than most. George smiled. "Do you know anyone around here named David? Young man, black, maybe homeless?" The mechanic shook his head. "There's a homeless shelter a few blocks down. You might find him there." That evening, George went searching. The shelter was crowded, full of people bundled in ragged clothes. He asked around, but no one had seen David. He left food and blankets for the others before heading back to his car, heart heavy. Just as he was about to leave, he saw a familiar figure sitting near the church steps, huddled, shivering, but unmistakably the same. "David," he called out. The young man looked up startled. Snow covered his shoulders, his lips pale from cold. When he recognized George, he stood quickly. "Sir, is your wife all right?" George smiled warmly. "She's recovering, thanks to you. You saved her life that night." David lowered his eyes. "I'm glad she's okay." He stepped closer. "Listen, son, You didn't just fix my car. You reminded me what real humanity looks like. I've spent my whole life chasing success, but that night, you taught me what wealth really means." He paused, then reached into his coat pocket and handed David a folded envelope. David hesitated. "Sir, I told you—" "Please," George interrupted softly, "it's not payment, it's gratitude." David finally opened the envelope. Inside was not just money, it was a letter. "Come see me at Whitmore Industries. You have a job waiting." David's eyes widened. A job?" George smiled warmly. "I need people who fix things when no one else will. Starting tomorrow, you'll work for me. You'll have a place to live, food to eat, and a chance to rebuild your life." For a moment, David couldn't speak. The snow fell silently around them. Then he whispered, "Thank you, sir. I won't let you down." "I know you won't, because you didn't when it mattered most." Months passed. David now wore clean clothes, had his own small apartment, and worked as an assistant mechanic at George's company. He was good at what he did, honest, hardworking, kind to everyone. People liked him instantly. George and his wife treated him like family. On Sundays, they'd invite him for dinner, insisting he sit at the same table, not as a worker, but as someone who had once saved their world. One evening, George said to him, "You know, David, the night we met, I thought I was helping my wife survive, but maybe it was God helping me rediscover what life's really about." David smiled. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness can turn the darkest night into the beginning of a new day. George nodded.
"You're proof of that." Years later, when George passed away peacefully, his will revealed something unexpected. He had left half of his company shares to David, the same young man who had once stood shivering in the snow but never stopped believing in kindness. The newspapers called it shocking. The lawyers called it generosity. But David knew what it really was, a circle. Because years later, when he became successful himself, he would walk the same streets on winter nights, handing blankets to the homeless, fixing broken things for strangers, and reminding them with a warm smile. Kindness never disappears, it just travels from one heart to another. And somewhere, in the quiet hum of the wind, it felt as if George and Margaret were smiling,